So how you doing here, Knockback?
Good. Looking forward to Isle of Dread.
Yeah, very much so. So, what you are one of the folks we have on because you've been delving a lot into D&D lore. You're the one who gets to decide sort of how we fit Vecna in and make all that happen. And so it was
Right.
nice to kind of get you on to talk a little bit about it. So, our Isle of Dread is not exactly first edition or second edition or third edition, or what is it? Let's pose that to you.
So it's a mixture of things. Isle of Dread originally came out 1981, and there have been various versions since. Back when Wizards of the Coast was doing a playtest for 5th edition, they put out a 5th edition version of Isle of Dread as part of that playtest. So we've taken things mostly from the original version and the 5th edition version, and then we've added some things of our own. Which, we don't always do that. We didn't do that with Curse of Strahd, for example, but we felt it was called for here because the original Isle of Dread was very open-ended. It was a true sandbox. And the thing about sandbox campaigns is the DM gets to add stuff. So we did.
Yeah. One of the things that intrigued us most about the various Isle of Dread versions out there was the decision to allow it to travel across worlds that appeared, as I understand, in one of the 5th edition playtests.
It originally showed up in 4th edition, but got carried over to 5th edition.
Okay.
So there's a notion in those versions that the Isle of Dread mostly hangs out on the elemental plane of water, but then teleports to other places mysteriously and shows up for a while and then disappears again. And we thought that was a cool idea, so we took that and then started asking the question, like, why is it teleporting around and who's calling the shots?
So I'm getting to Vecna in a second, Twitch chat, by the way. So in our incarnation rather, we've essentially said something like that has value to even someone like Vecna because they can use it for their own purposes.
Yeah, Vecna is, after all, the god of secrets. And we, from that, figured he must be a collector. He collects secrets. And, an entire island, giant island that can teleport between the planes is a pretty cool thing to have in your collection.
Yeah.
So he uses the island, the island itself is part of his collection, but he also uses it to store things that are part of his collection.
Let me talk a minute about the video that people are seeing as we talk. This is the public area, the village that you will eventually find yourself into, actually pretty quickly find yourself into after the introductory quest in Isle of Dread here. And then a little bit later on, I'm actually going to be running through that travel quest from the harbor into the village here. So we're actually are going to spoil the very first quest, the very first one, that'll get you into Isle of Dread, so that you can kind of get a sense of what's happening. But it seemed like a good fit for our discussion of lore because we're doing some expose and things like that during these initial times. So it seemed to potentially fit best with some of the content we were looking at. So because it's been used by Vecna, and it also has its own long history of traveling across planes, it finds itself a little bit of a melting pot across the universe, essentially, because people, for various reasons, whether accidentally or very much on purpose, find themselves trapped on the Isle of Dread.
Right, so you'll run across some people in this village who, like you, are also castaways who have been brought to the Isle of Dread or washed up on the Isle of Dread. And then there's also just people on the island who came there. Obviously, the most obvious example are the pirates who, come from all different worlds. But also the Tabaxi at some point showed up on the Isle of Dread, as did some creatures from the Feywild, which was another case where we're like, oh, there's something in the original module we can't really do, but what can we do that's in the same spirit? So we brought a couple of creatures from the Feywild into Isle of Dread on the theory that the Isle of Dread at some point during its long history had visited the Feywild.
I have to admit, now that we've introduced Tabaxi, the Tabaxi is the character that you're seeing here, from behind and occasionally from the front and such.
Yep.
The Tabaxi are a good introduction into DDO in general that we've been wanting to do, and this seems like a good fit in part, but not directly because of the initial Rakasha, as it were. You know, there was a feline-like species on the Isle of Dread, and so even though we're not directly integrating them in the same way, it seemed like a pretty good fit.
Yeah, it seemed like, if we were running this in 5th edition, that's, in pen and paper, this is what the DM would probably do, because there was originally a different cat person race in Isle of Dread, but the one that is used in 5th edition is mostly Tabaxi. So it made sense to swap in the Tabaxi for the original guys, because people just know Tabaxi better these days.
Yeah. And so they're here too. Any of the editions that you can look up the various editions of Isle of Dread. I can do that for you here. But the editions can include the Tabaxi race as well. And then eventually the Tabaxi will be released for points, and we do have that over in our FAQ on DDO.com. It'll be 15.95 DDO points in December. But it's right now available with your purchase of Isle of Dread. And a bunch of people have already pre-purchased this, but if you're new to the concept, you can find a link to that over on DDO.com. Just click on Shop, Current Expansion. It'll get you whatever geographic location you're in or what have you. It'll send you to the right place. So there we go. And yeah, Tabaxi is in all of the editions here, including the standard edition of Isle of Dread. So, all right. So back to Vecna. There's a bit of a Vecna-like elephant in the room, and that Vecna seems to be quite popular right now. And so why don't we just kind of mention that real quickly? I'm not sure anyone's going to believe us, but we've actually wanted to do Vecna for a long time.
Yeah, this is kind of a coincidence. So we have been planning to get Vecna into the game for at least 5 years, because he's a famous part of Dungeons and Dragons, and just as we did Lolth, we wanted to do Vecna, but it takes a long time for us to actually implement lots of story ideas because we have so many. So Vecna kind of had to wait his turn, and as it turned out, when he came out, when we ended up doing him, Stranger Things also decided to do Vecna. So
yeah, but you know what? Hey, if we can get in the cultural zeitgeist, that's cool too, right? So
yeah. Well, and I should also point out that when we started planning on Isle of Dread, we did not say, "Oh, we're going to release it 2 weeks after a Jurassic Park movie."
No, good point. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's funny. I didn't even think about that one. I guess I should have. Because this is all about dinosaurs in some ways. Not all about dinosaurs, but it is a big part about dinosaurs.
But I'll be honest, dinosaurs are the reason why we made Isle of Dread.
Yeah.
Because when we were going through lists of old modules, Isle of Dread always came up because it's like, oh, it's the dinosaur. It's full of dinosaurs, and everybody, including everyone on our team, loves dinosaurs. But that also created a challenge in that doing dinosaurs correctly is a whole bunch of art and animation, and we wanted to do it correctly. So Isle of Dread got bumped a couple of times because we needed to fit it into the schedule.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of new art in this update. A whole bunch of dinosaurs, but also all new trees and rocks and village assets. So, like I said, we had to. Isle of Dread has been a long time coming, and it's been a long time coming because we had to, make room for it in the schedule.
So, to the extent you feel comfortable talking about it, how does the Isle of Dread Vecna storyline fit into our long-running story with the Codex of the Infinite Planes? Where are we on that journey?
Well, we're going to find out if indeed we're going to see the starter quest. Mm-hmm. But I will point out that we've already mentioned the name of Vecna in DDO, and that was back when we did the quest series about the Hidden Hand, where the Hidden Hand was looking for various artifacts that you were also looking for. And you talked to somebody from Wargrave University, and they're like, Yeah, it turns out these hidden hand guys worship this weird, obscure god called Vecna, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, A, it's Vecna, but B, nobody in Eberron really knows who Vecna is. So why is that? And the long and the short of it is, and if you've read the Eberron campaign book, 5th edition Eberron campaign book, you may already know the answer to this, is that at one point, Eberron and its associated planes were hidden from sort of the rest of the multiverse because of the actions of Eberron the dragon and Sybaris.
Ah, nice.
So people in Eberron and its associated planes didn't know about Vecna, and Vecna didn't know about the planes, about Eberron and the associated planes.
But now very
and
much
that
does.
has changed. Yes, that has changed. And the question is, why has it changed? And I don't think we've actually explained that part yet, so I will shut up now.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. I know we're going into a little bit dangerous territory, but we've been working on the base story of Codex of the Infinite Planes for quite some time, and it is going somewhere. We can say that it is going somewhere.
Yes. And
yep.
yes, and Vecna is not just a diversion. He's going to play a big part in the story upcoming. So this is not the last you'll see of him. This is really just his introduction.
Yep.
And he's, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Yeah.
I was just about to say, he is the topping on the ice cream, as it were. The ice cream for this update is the Isle of Dread itself, dinosaurs, saber-toothed cats, the Kopru. We haven't even talked about the Kopru. And then on top of that, we also have Vecna. So he's the something extra.
Yeah. All right. So I just wanted to get to Twitch chat briefly. There's been a couple of questions. Hey, is this pre-recorded video? Why, yes, it is. Look at this. No hands, and yet the cursor's moving. So there's a reason for that. I'm doing a fairly technically challenging broadcast from working from home. That's what this is. And so rather than try to stream and monitor chat and conduct the interviews and that at the same time, I wanted to ensure that I had good frame rate quality and all that sort of thing. So I pre-recorded the video here. It also gave me an opportunity to just chop it up just slightly. For the most part, it's raw, but I cut out a few bits just for time and what have you. And overall, let me know how it turns out. I think it's better. It's certainly less stressful for me than trying to have the additional game of trying to play the game while doing all this. So, it's kind of nice for me. Let me know what you think. So let's talk about the Kopru.
So the Kopru are this race of ancient beings who originally created the Isle of Dread and made it teleport around. And they used to run a giant empire on, let's just call it another world. But that empire has fallen, and they're sort of in decline. They made a bad deal. They made a deal with Vecna, which is sort of by definition a bad deal. And Vecna has not helped them very much. And the slaves of the Kopru revolted, cast down the Kopru. And the Kopru have been in retreat ever since. But there's sort of this lurking Lovecraftian menace in the background.
And they did exist in various incarnations of Isle of Dread. So
they're straight out of the original.
So it's one of the new monsters directly from Isle of Dread that we're bringing into the game here. So.
Yep.
All right. Yep. So on screen, you're seeing Vecna.
And there's Vecna, and how did we end up with Vecna? Well, because you ran into the mysterious stranger who you encountered in the Feywild, and it turns out the mysterious stranger from the Feywild is, in fact, Vecna.
Yeah. Yep. So, throughout, how much of leeway did the quest designers have? And we are going to have a section on the specific quests and such later. I'd sit down with Flimsy Firewood and Nobob to talk a little bit about quests and wilderness. But in general here, how much of the individual quests are about the main story. Do we also do what I guess also existed in Isle of Dread, which is side stories, things like that?
Well, so the original Isle of Dread literally has no story. There's no like this is how it starts and this is how it ends. I guess there's sort of a start and that you find a map, which you can then follow to the Isle of Dread, but that's about it. So we had to make up a story, and there isn't that much of a story. We tried to keep the original loose, hex crawly feeling, but there is this opening quest, which Flimsy Firewood did most of the heavy lifting on, which tells the story of how you got to the Isle of Dread, and that's pretty story intensive. And then there's the capstone to the Kopru related storyline, also has story in it. But there's a lot of quests in this update that are just side stories, because that's the nature of the original module.
That's what I was getting at with my question here. Yeah. We want to give you an opportunity to not just be focused on the one goal, but also explore Isle of Dread a little. So.
Right, and that that's part of capturing the feeling of the original module. So Saltmarsh had way more of a story, so we put that into the update, and part of Isle of Dread is that it's much more freeform, so we tried to be more freeform. So this particular dungeon is not that, because this is the story intensive dungeon, but there are other dungeons that are just like, there's an ankylosaur that's acting weird. Look into that.
Funny you mentioned that. I think I've got video of that one later. I think that's the quest I chose to sort of use as an example while we talked a little bit. So,
yeah, and that's straight out of the book. Except we put an interpretation on why the ankylosaur is acting weird.
Yeah, it showed off a bunch of dinosaurs. Seemed like an obvious fit.
Right.
So one of the things that struck me when I was playing this quest is I don't know if we've done it before. We maybe have. But it's pretty rare that we start at one point in the quest and then do a flashback in the quest and then end up really sort of where we were at the beginning. We don't do that a whole lot.
There's the gnome quest that does that, but we don't do that very often.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. So
this quest was a bunch of work to put together, but I think it really pays off. And it fits the old school these are my adventures, here's the story of our adventures mentality. Because you're basically reminiscing with the other guy in your D&D party who was Foxpaw.
Yeah, so Foxpaw, he actually has a role to play in all this, because even though he is, as I understand it, not exactly, he's kind of a junior member of Morgrave University, isn't he? In the 12?
He's a junior member of the Gatekeepers. And also a very unusual member because he's a drow. Gatekeepers are usually orcs. And also originally was an artificer and has sort of changed careers. But he's really interested in the Codex pages, which is how you got involved with this. There's the prequel dungeon to Isle of Dread that came out in December. So he was part of that. So he's kind of the glue connecting you to the Gatekeepers and, the reminder that this has something to do with the Codex pages. Though the Codex pages really don't come up in this expansion very much.
You're a little busy.
Yeah. But, put a pin in that. We'll get back to that later in the future.
All right. So at jcom_2 wants to know, so does that mean we can kill a demigod at level 32? I'm going to say no on that.
First off, in this version, Vecna is not a demigod. He is a full-fledged god. And secondly, no, you can't. This is not the update where you beat up Vecna.
Yeah.
Like, whether you could beat up Vecna is an interesting question, but this update will not answer it.
I mean, not that wouldn't be fun,
update,
but, we are talking Vecna here, so.
Yeah, in this update, Vecna is a god. WotC just, literally last week put out some stuff about when Vecna was not yet a god.
Yeah.
So in that stat block they released last week, he isn't a god. Which is why I'm being so persnickety here about specifying that he is. And you can tell because he's missing his eye and his hand.
Yes. You don't want to know. You don't want to know why that's that way. But yeah. All right, so we should probably just get to a few questions in chat. If you have any chat questions, please do ask them. We'll get to them here in these final minutes here with you. We've got a little bit of time yet. What else should we mention? This is part of a level cap increase that we'll be talking about here in just a little bit. So players are able to get up to level 32. And that does introduce, although we've had legendary quests before, players are now into legendary levels. So, as a story writer and as someone who's kind of planning what we're doing here going forward, how do you envision sort of legendary, sort of feeling like legendary?
Well, since we've introduced Vecna, we've already introduced the codex pages. Things will eventually get much bigger in terms of much more like we'd expect from a high level D&D campaign. But when I say eventually, that doesn't mean like the next big thing we release will necessarily be that. It might be something. It might be a level 9 pack, like something like Ravenloft, something like that, which when Ravenloft wasn't connected to our main story at all. But like I said, we have long-term plans. Sometimes those plans take years to pay off, but payoffs are coming.
Nonetheless, there is going to be plenty of time here in the coming years where you and your crew will be making quests above level 32. And so that's sort of something that we're heading into while we offer heroic and whatever we end up wanting to do. Right, we're not always a slave to the end game, as it were. We often will sometimes go back and so
we try and support it. So we sometimes get complaints, of why am I fighting bandits and rats at level 30 or whatever, which like I understand, but the way to look at that is like Saltmarsh is not a level 30 pack. That particular pack is a level 3 pack that also has level 30 as a bonus. And something, more like this pack, this pack actually has two faces because this particular quest you're on is advancing the high level storyline. So that is a level 30 quest that also has a low level version. But then the actual Isle of Dread, where you're like fighting dinosaurs, that's a relatively low level task.
Yeah.
Anyways, we try and keep both people in the reincarnation loop and people at level cap happy. So that means occasionally you'll be fighting a wimpy, high level demon or a superpowered rat. But that's the lore price we pay.
All right. I am going to ask a question that I already know the answer to and already know we can't answer specifically, I don't think. But Mediouth wants to know, is there a plan to make legendary versions of older quests? And the answer to that is yes.
Well, yes. Yes. So, yes. Some quests will get changed to, reflect the level cap increase.
I can think of one thing in particular we'll be doing here that might be an answer to that question.
We have, but I don't know whether
we're not
allowed to discuss
we're
those.
not. The answer is we're not, unfortunately. Sorry. But
so
that
stuff
just
like
going
that
to be
is
a
coming,
hint at the moment. So,
but we make no promises about specific quests.
Yeah.
The plan is not finalized.
All right. So, Wizard Adventures, your question is more of a systems talk here about working on an Archmage, things like that. Let me see if we can find... Ed Rain wants to know, does that mean I can be a member of a cult of Vecna as a new religion option for divines?
That would definitely be interesting. We haven't talked about that in particular, but we have talked about some other options, not specifically for divines, but for role-playing things other than lawful good. Anyways, who knows what the future will bring?
Yeah.
If you've played the capstone to Isle of Dread, you might sort of get Vecna's opinion on that, he has a very definite opinion of what your role is. But whether you, the player, have the same opinion is a different question.
All right. How many quests, raids, wilderness areas, etc. are in it? I have an answer for that. That is 12 quests, 1 raid, 1 wilderness area, and our raid's going to be getting released a few weeks after Isle of Dread gets released.
And to plug something that hasn't been plugged, the wilderness area has multiple explorers. There's a regular explorer where you find cool geographic locations, and then there's 2 different collect the journal quests. So there's an extra boost from that.
Do you know, is Kaz, K-A-S, making an appearance? I'm not actually personally familiar with what that is.
Kaz is the reason why Vecna doesn't have a hand.
Yeah.
Maybe an eye?
Okay,
I don't remember the eye. That is a good question, which we are working on. We're trying to figure that out. But maybe it could happen. You know, no promises as to when, but.
All right, I am just going through Twitch chat to see if we have any last questions here before I move on to the next guest. I do want to thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I think we're getting a lot of systems questions mostly. Raid is part of the story with Vecna, question mark?
It is connected to Vecna, although it's not strictly speaking about Vecna. It's about another new original character who you'll learn a lot about on the landscape. But it does connect to Vecna, and you'll see him there.
Do you know, does the raid require flagging?
The raid does not require flagging.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. Well, I think I'm going to let you go then. Thank you very much for joining me here, Knockback. And I'm going to be cutting to like a transition screen while I set up the next guest, and then I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. So thanks, Knockback, for being here, and thanks for watching our Isle of Dread preview, everyone.